Hey there, it's your boo thing, alias Reeds. I wanted to say thank you for coming back to listen to more of my narrations, and hello there to specifically you, first-time listener. To my bedtime people, thank you for choosing my stories tonight. Remember to like and subscribe. It helps me out tremendously. Okay, thanks, bye! We were several hours into the hike when we came upon a small lake that was fed by a small upstream creek and a waterfall. Multicolored rocks littered the ground along the bank and made crunching noises as we walked across them. The subsequent stream and aforementioned small lake shimmered warmly in the evening sun. Up ahead was an area of trees where it was no longer dense, and the foliage gave way to barren earth. Pine needles carpeted the ground there, and it would be a great spot to set up camp. And so we went on to set up for the night. Even though we were still about half a day's walk from the target, we still slept in shifts. First it was Phyllis, and then me, and then Brent. During my shift, nothing excited happened. Sorry guys, we were walking all day and we're in the Cedar Woods. There's not much else aside from our target to be wary of as far as we know. The morning sun yet again warmly greeted us, and the song of local fauna and the rustle of foliage from the northern wind made it hard to imagine a life and death battle in just a few hours. As we sat around our fire pit and ate some fish, courtesy of the lake, we relaxed and chatted, and discussed the phase Scorn we were hunting, and hyped each other up. Bob was trying to skip rocks and grew noticeably irritated after a few failed attempts. Seeing her frustration, Auk floated over to Bob and perched lightly on her shoulder. She huffed again in frustration, and Auk pulled a flat rock from the water's edge. Using some kind of telekinesis, Auk moved the rock in front of Bob as if to give her a clear view. He began to spin the rock as he explained to her the basic ingredients and methods needed to skip a rock. Grab a flattish rock and throw it along the water surface. The more spin you can put on it, the better it will skip, he said. Bob seemed to understand and began to rifle around the shore to find flat rocks, and Auk floated back to Brent's side. Brent looked over to Bob, a soft twinkle in his eye, complimenting his loving smirk as he watched her. Bob had begun to feel more like a kid, less like my cat as of late. She walks more upright, always holds someone's hand when we walk, and she crawls into one of our beds if she gets scared. She speaks enough that we can understand her, and her level of sentience is above that of a normal house cat. I feel like Brent began to see her as his child, too. I mean, kind of weird, but Bob was into it, so whatever. After a short while of appreciating her, our Fae had to go to their realm for a debriefing, and they would be back in just a few hours. We said our goodbyes and returned to our discussions after they opened the portal and disappeared inside of it. We sorted out the final details of our situational maneuvers and battle plans after another 10 minutes or so. I glanced over at Bob to see her with a huge flat stone the size of her chest. A faint smirk crept across my lips, and then I returned to my focus in the conversation. Right as we were about to wrap it up, we heard an inhuman screech erupt from the center of a lake, instantly followed by a loud clack. In perfect unison, our collective attention pivoted towards the once tranquil small lake. As I turned, the world seemed to decelerate, and an ominous sensation gripped me. It was then that I witnessed the terrifying moment that was consuming Bob. There was Bob, with her back to the water, mid-stride running towards us, her arms outstretched, toe beans visible and spread wide, and her claws drawn in a desperate attempt to grab hold of anything. But there was only air. Startled confusion was carved across her face and tears welled along the bottom of her eyelids. We locked eyes as her head just began to snap backwards by something behind her. Just beyond her head, a pair of gnarled teeth and jaws snatched her by the hair, barely missing her skull. It was about the size of a small car, and it looked like a smooth and yellow alligator snake with a few black stripes on its body. It was just beginning to pull back into the water, dragging Bob with it. The look of absolute terror on Bob's face still makes me sick with sadness. She had no idea what was happening. She just wanted to skip rocks. Time snapped back into its regular pace, and Bob was violently yanked backwards into the water. Before I could take a step or even scream, Brent leapt towards the water with the savage strength that shot him forward like a guided missile. He looked a bit like Escanor when he was in his savage form, mixed with the rage of the Hulk. His big muscles swelled and flexed, and every vein bulged under his stretched skin and inflated muscles. Sweat evaporated off of him, leaving a trail of steam as he sailed through the air. A scream erupted from Brent, echoing through the forest even after he crashed into the water and disappeared beneath the surface. Large rolling swaths of water then broke the surface, sending out waves that crashed against the shoreline. Large yellow creatures were slung out of the water. Some went straight up, leaving spiraling trails of blood and water to dance in the air. Some were sent violently skipping across the surface of the water until they collided with the bank and rolled into a slushy stop. Some were launched under the water with enough force to leave trails and eruptions on the surface. In one of these swaths was Bob. She screamed when her head broke the surface. Her long calico hair was matted over her eyes. Her large, soft ears were now soggy and pinned to her head. She swam as best she could, but the turbulent waters from the fight behind her sent several waves barreling over her head. This quickly pushed her under again. I was finally in the water just as this happened, and I dove in. I swam against the waves with everything I had. I reached where I'd last seen Bob and went under. Something large and yellow blew past me at incredible speed, creating another eruption against the surface. The angle of the underwater wake pushed me down to the bottom. The previously clear waters were now clouded by a mess of Brent's defense. I remained at the bottom as I searched for Bob, swimming like a frog to maximize my reach. After a few grueling moments, I realized I hadn't taken a good breath. If I couldn't breathe, Bob definitely couldn't. That thought made me fight against the spasms in my lungs, and I continued my search. Another yellow object flew past me, and then there was Bob, shoved by the turbulence. She collided with me at an astonishing speed, and we knocked the wind out of each other. We flipped and spiraled backwards underwater as the momentum sent us tumbling. I hit my head several times, but I still held on to Bob, and she held me. And we had no more breath by the time we stopped. No more energy. Our embrace tightened as we settled against the bottom of the pond. This was probably going to be the end in all honesty. My head was pounding as I lay there, the pain slowly growing in intensity as I fought on instinct to keep the water out of my lungs. The world was flashing red and fading to black. I was again sent spiraling in another random direction, probably from another one of Brent's underwater yellow monster torpedoes. My vision was flooded with a bright red. Did I hit my head again? I must have been dying. It felt like there was a strong breeze whisking away what little heat I had left. I buried my face against Bob one last time. I took a deep breath, accepting my fate as I silently sobbed. Warm tears caressed my cold face, and they felt pleasant in my underwater tomb. I was about to give in to the exhaustion when something forced my mouth open. Some kind of hot, slimy worm rushed past my teeth. Something deep inside of me woke up at that very moment, energy coursing forth. I swung hard with everything I had, which wasn't a whole lot at that specific moment. And my hand met the owner of the oral intruder with a pretty solid clap. The worm withdrew and the creature screamed in pain.
What the fuck?
It almost sounded like Phyllis saying, "What the fuck?" but through a long tube. Phyllis is pretty. I like Phyllis. I wonder what her lips felt like. Maybe like that worm. Too bad I'll never know. I felt my body react to the thought of her, and I chuckled to myself, thinking this was a funny way to go out. With a slight smirk on my face, I opened my eyes and regarded the clear blue waters one last time. There was a blinding light above me, the light which I'd heard about. And then I was slapped, like really, really hard. The sudden shock cleared away my apparent delusions. With a sharp crack, and I came rushing back with total consciousness and a heavy dose of vertigo. Phyllis was standing over me, covered in water, scowling and rubbing the side of her head. On her back was Bob, staring at me wide-eyed, and Brent was lying down and laughing on the shore beside me. I sat up, looked at Phyllis' concerned face, and quickly realized I was alive. With what little energy I had left, I threw my arms in the air as a signal of victory, violently coughed until some water finally made its way out of my lungs, and then promptly passed out. I awoke soon after, and Phyllis explained to me what had happened from their perspective. After I dove in the water to get Bob broke the surface a few feet from shore. Phyllis waded in and helped her out of the water. Bob sputtered and coughed a little, but she was okay. Brent continued his best defense as a strong offense for another 20 seconds or so, and then swiftly made his way back towards shore to check on the status of Bob. He saw that Phyllis and Bob were safely on shore, but I was nowhere to be found. On his way back to shore, he found me hugging the wriggling clawed foot of one of the creatures he'd killed. I was in about 3.5 feet of water, and the foot was wrapped around my face in a death grip. We wouldn't let go of each other. Brent scooped me up in his big, burly, manly arms and carried me away, and the foot of the face sucker out of the water. He set me down on the shore and then collapsed next to me after seeing Bob was safe. Phyllis saw that I wasn't breathing and that I started turning blue. My arms fell limply off the foot, and the foot released its grip. At once, she began CPR. She opened my mouth and started to give me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. After a few breaths, I suddenly tensed up and punched her in the ear. She recoiled from the blow, and when she looked back at me, I was erect, giggling, and I had a stupid smile on my face, which Brent found hysterical. I was staring at the sun when Phyllis slapped me hard enough to hurt her hand. I sat up, looked at everyone, flapped like a bird for a few seconds, burped, threw up, and then passed back out. I like my version better, so if you tell anyone about this, just remember Phyllis was wrong. After recovering from the emotional damage, I sat down with Brent, Phyllis, and Bob at the campfire. Bob lay on her side at my feet, facing the fire. She rolled over just enough to expose her little itty-bitty belly to the fire. One arm and one leg pulled up in a prime T-Rex pose. After apologizing to Phyllis and thanking Brent, we decided to move our site. We filled up on fish and yellow snakelgator and set off deeper into the forest. An eerie atmosphere was beginning to set in. The forest canopy above cast long shadows and silver shafts as we quietly departed on our hike to the hunting grounds. Our faith still hadn't returned to us. I led the group as planned, in case we got ambushed. The lead was normally the one to get hit by the face Scorn, and we traversed through the thickening thicket. The thickening thicket thickened thickeningly. The thick trees creaked as they danced in the thick thickness of the wind. Thick blades of grass were crushed under our thick feet as we navigated. Phyllis, who was thick with 2 C's, wore a troubled expression thickly on her face, and thick boy Trent seemed ever thickeningly quiet ever since we left the lake. Now Bob prattled alongside us. Her feline grace was mixed with the hobbling cadence of a goblin, causing her to move like some kind of half-cat, half-goblin creature. We exchanged uneasy glances as we pressed forward, each of us acutely aware that we would soon enter the general area of the satyr attacks. The realization that we were about to come into contact with our first face Scorn formed an actualization in those minutes. "Hey, guys?" It was Phyllis. "Hey, we should stop and set up camp before we move in too much further." She broke away from the traveling line and pointed towards another clearing to the north of our westward trail. A large boulder stuck out of the ground, creating an overhang for which we could set up our gear. Brent and I stopped to observe her observation, and after observing the site observingly, we also agreed that it would be ideal. Oh, and do you want to know the best part? There were vines. Like, everywhere. Fucking love vines. Brent was the first to begin walking to the clearing. Phyllis and I followed side by side, closely behind. And I was close enough to Phyllis that I could have grabbed her hand. I mean, if I took several steps closer to her, and then I could grab her hand. And Brent did a little half spin to face us and began walking backwards. The smile was back on his face, and his sullen mood from earlier seemed to have left him. He outstretched his arms, motioning at nothing specific, and addressed us. "Back at the lake. I've never been that deep into savagery and maintained control without your help," he said, motioning towards Phyllis. And then he dropped his arms to his side with a firm pat, and his smile yet wavered again. "But I don't know if I would have hurt you guys if you would have got too close. All I could think about was saving Bob, and at first. But as I sank more and more into that rage, I cared less and less." Brent slowed down, and then turned around to walk with us once we caught up. Bob, being the emotional support cablin she is, sensed Brent's unrest and offered a comforting meow, which sounded like the noises a big kid makes when he's imitating a dinosaur roar, and also like that same kid was in the middle of falling down a large flight of concrete stairs. Brent reached out a hand and began to pet Bob, who was now standing next to him. We walked together until Brent broke the silence once more. He took a deep, shuddering breath. What would happen if I hurt you? Tears began to wet his rose-blushed cheeks. His face cheeks, not his butt cheeks. What if I... We all stopped, and Phyllis and Brent were staring at each other. One great benefit of having a riddleist like Phyllis is she can so quickly pull you out of a spiral. I knew she was rummaging around in his head trying to find his doubt and guilt so she could shrink it. It normally takes a while for Phyllis to work down recent events, and Brent was at her mercy until she was finished. I slowly slid Brent's bag off of his shoulder, and would you believe this giant golden retriever of a man had filled half his pack with pretty rocks? Really, dude? I hope you read this, or hear it from a narrator. I'm sending you the link if it gets narrated, and this part will be weird and meta, and no one's gonna like this strange time and perspective change. I'll get back to the story. Turning my attention to the campsite, I dragged the bags over and began setting it up beneath the large overhang of boulders, a natural shelter for our tents. First on the agenda was arranging Phyllis's tent next to mine. I told her I did this on accident, so I'm currently thankful that she doesn't really use computers now, so I won't be exposed for the devious tent setter-upper that I was at the time. The promise of flickering flames and a soon-to-be campfire danced in my thoughts as I collected dry firewood, and then meticulously prepared a fire pit. Meanwhile, Bob, ever cautious and curious, explored the clearing. Her playful antics looked more and more goofy as she adapted to the changes still happening to her. She bumbled around for a bit, chasing bugs, making those little cat chirps like some cats do when they're hunting. Only it sounded like a machine gun that makes erotic zombie sounds. When the tents took shape, and with the firewood neatly stacked, I stole a moment to observe Phyllis and Brent. Their silence still hung in the air. Then I heard a loud thud and turned around to see Brent lying flat on his back. Phyllis was still standing there with a frozen look of absolute fear on her face. Her eyes were dilated and blacked out. I'd never seen that before. Guys! I yelled as I ran to them, having absolutely no idea what was happening. I reached them quickly and Brent was unconscious. Phyllis was still locked up. A low growl that sounded like a bass note from an EDM concert and a fork scraping a plate emanated from Bob, facing the opposite side of the clearing, on all fours and backed up. Her ears were pinned to her head, and she was ultra-floofed. I looked across the darkening way and saw what Bob was looking at, perched in a tree. My heart began to race with an icy intensity and my hands grew clammy. I glanced back at Brent and he was still playing freeze tag with himself. Redirecting my attention to the creature once more, I couldn't help but notice its complete lack of movement. It didn't bother to acknowledge my presence, not even bothering to turn my way. While its body had a human-like shape with average proportions, it followed the classic trope of an eerie forest entity, being extremely thin. The thinness created an illusion of elongation, contributing to an overall unsettling appearance. The creature's skin had an off yellow-brown tone, hanging loosely in certain areas on its bony frame and tightly clinging to others. This created a peculiar contrast, as if the skin wouldn't quite decide how to fit around its form. Moving upward, its face was almost bat-like, complete with pointed ears and a stubbed nose. The eyes, shrouded in shadow, concealed any potential intelligence or malice lurking within. Then I noticed another strange part. It had the same look on its face Phyllis did. It was frozen in place and looked terrified. I looked over to Bob, who was comically looking back and forth between the creature and Phyllis. She was also trying to form the same thought. After a few more pensive moments, I decided to try to get the thing's attention. I first tried hopping around and shouting, waving my arms in the air like I just didn't care. I tried crab walking with my tiny pinchy hand claw crab pinchers pinching feverishly in the air and murping vigorously. I even tried power squats. Nothing worked. So I moved on to the next logical choice. I walked over to Phyllis, pausing briefly while I stared deeply into her bluish-brownish-greenish eyes. And I observed the terror in her beautiful face, and I gently took it in my hand. After a moment of staring, I said her name. Phyllis. Hey. Can you hear me? I think you have Brent stuck in his head somewhere and you're not moving. Can you move, please? Can you do anything? I waited for a moment before deeply sighing to myself. I pulled my hand back and slapped her. It seemed to work on me when anybody else did it, so I figured it was worth a shot, but nothing happened. The only reaction I gained was a pinkening of my hand and the reddening of her cheek. Damn. I turned back to the creature in the tree and pondered my next move, rubbing the tingles out of my fingers from the slap. Moments later, a loud whistling pierced the air and the creature's head snapped sideways with a sharp crack. An explosion of movement and sounds came from the creature. It let out a snarled yelp as it fell from the tree, flailing incredibly frantically. It landed heavily on its back and shoulders, accidentally kneeing itself in the face. I was about to start laughing when I felt the grip of 1,000 black holes clamp down on my shoulder from behind me. Brent must be awake, lost in the sauce again. A small, yet manly whimper escaped my mouth as I felt the muscle split and bone creak against the fingers worming deeper still. I'm so dead. I was forcibly spun around, face to face, and able to see my assailant. But it wasn't Brent. This creature was smaller, with deep red burning in its eyes, like a very bright stoplight. Veins rippled through its porcelain skin and long hair shrouded its face. With its free hand, it pushed the hair out of its face, and I screamed in primordial fear. Every fiber of my being told me to run, told me to tear away from my shoulder to survive. The creature was Phyllis. She was standing there with angry tears in her eyes, and the red welt of my fingers on her cheek.
What the fuck was that? Why do you keep hitting me?
Phyllis yelled, clearly beyond upset.
And why the fuck did you hold my face like that? You stupid asshole!
She sounded flustered as she raised an open hand high into the air. Her hand sat centered and silhouetted against the full moon in the clear night sky. Poetic justice was inbound, like a server needing tips for drugs after their shift. I began to stammer out a shocked reply when suddenly Bob let out a scream that sounded like a foghorn and walrus grunts. In the middle of the unfolding madness, Phyllis, amped up on her cocktail of rage and adrenaline, swung her hand down with a vengeance. The sharp crack of the slap echoed across the clearing, a crisp exclamation point that ripped through the forest like a bite from a Honeycrisp apple through a megaphone. A red welt now blossomed on my cheek, mirroring the frustration etched into her eyes. I fumbled through words, still trying to wrap my head around everything that was happening. The red glow in her eyes amped up as she shifted her focus from me to the creature on the ground. Her fury-filled eyes cast a malevolence that seemed to stretch the shadows around us. She was radiating murderous intent thicker than the thickening thicket. The creature also seemed to understand the force of nature that was an angry Phyllis. It looked back at Bob, inhaled, and screeched as hard as it could. It leaned into it and everything. Its mouth hung open and needle-like translucent teeth glistened with saliva as the spittle rushed forth. Its whole body rippled and squirmed like giant worms were wriggling beneath its awful skin. And then it stood upright, looked at me, glanced at Phyllis, and ran back into the woods. Phyllis and I were left standing there, alone, cheeks throbbing and speechless. What the fuck was even happening? Now, thankfully, Brent groaned at that moment, signaling the downfall of our weird and awkward silence. Bob came bounding over with a weird expression on her face, something that could have been confusion and worry. Brent slowly sat up, bracing himself with one hand still on the ground while he rubbed his head with the other. After a moment, he opened his eyes and looked at Phyllis, and then me, and then Bob, and then back to me and Phyllis. "What happened to your faces?" Brent mumbled, sounding a little drunk as he came to. Phyllis shot me a look, and then explained it all to Brent. She also told him something about contra-consciousness, the hive mind byway where intuition, vibes, and empathy are created. It sits between the conscious and subconscious mind. She said that she was traveling between the consciousnesses when she suddenly got locked in place. Another force seemed to have been ripped into the contra-consciousness, and it was just as confused as they were. Then Bob spoke up and had a strange message for us.
Not friend. Run far away. Mean.